Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a review of a Creed that has been a long time coming for me. And the reason is that this is actually the second bottle that I've had of this fragrance. So I have tons amounts of experience with this fragrance. And today we're going to talk about Creed's Himalaya from 2002. I'm going to call it a Pierre Bourdon, like it or not. I'm calling it a Pierre Bourdon creation. That's my opinion. I don't know if it's true, but my assumptions are that it's 99.9% true. And we'll talk about why I think that is here in just a minute. But this came out in 2002, okay? And as I said, tons of experience with Himalaya because Himalaya was one of my first Creed fragrances that I ever bought. And I originally had a 2010 batch, and the bottle was actually 120 mils back then. So it was the 4-ounce bottle that they used to do back in the day. And the box was all silver with the Creed crest all over it. I love that box. I love the old Creed presentation. This is just absolutely pathetic. I mean, the stickers on crooked if you take a look. The boring white cardboard all over. The old one had the Creed crest embossed all over the bottle. You'll be able to find it. If you just search Creed Himalaya, you'll see the old boxes I'm talking about. So I ran through 120 mils. And by the way, just real quick, I mean, this fragrance is easy to run through, to be fair. I mean, I wore this as my scent of the day today, and I may have done 20 sprays today. I mean, now reapplying periodically, but it's so easy to just lather this stuff on, okay? So, but I ran through the 120 mils, and this bottle, which is 100 mil, and it's a 2017 batch for you batch whores out there, 17Y01, okay? So this batch, if I hold it up to the light, I can see the juice is like right there. So you can see that's probably 60 mils and another 120 mils. So I probably ran through 180 mils or so of Himalaya in my life. Huge amounts of experience with this fragrance. And when I first started my fragrance journey, I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. The first thing I did is I mistakenly went to the fragrances houses that were most expensive. So I just went and bought Creeds and Amouages and all this stuff because I figured, well, if they're the most expensive, they have to be the best. Well, little did I know how deep the rabbit hole goes in the fragrance world, right? But that's where I started. That's why I have so much experience with this. And you can see I bought it again. I ran through the entire thing, stupidly threw the bottle and box away. This was well before I had a channel. Did I finish my original bottle of Himalaya? Years and years before I had a channel. And so I rebought it, if that tells you anything. But after I got this, I was like, I'm never buying another Creed. This was the Creed that literally made me say, I will never buy another Creed. And it's not that it's bad, it's just not what I remember, if that makes sense. So Himalaya is interesting as kind of like a case study and a fragrance in and of itself. So it's said to be, it's reported to be Michael Jordan's signature scent. And of course, every Creed has to have like famous people wearing it and loving it and stuff like that. But as I said, it came out in 2002, but it's also a very interesting case study in the life and times of Pierre Bourdon, who, honestly, I think we should just rip the Creed crest off, the 3-plumed crest off of the damn box, and just stick Pierre Bourdon's face on it, stick his mug on the top of these boxes, kind of like, with the Queen's face on money or something, or, dead presidents on money. Just stick Pierre Bourdon's face, just his mug, just straight up on the top of these Creed boxes, looking very Romanesque off to the side. But what's interesting about it is Creed, to me, is definitely the house that Pierre Bourdon built, okay? If you really think about it, two of Creed's best sellers, Green Irish Tweed and Aventus, are both Pierre Bourdon fingerprints all over it. Green Irish Tweed was literally a Pierre Bourdon creation, and he went on to say that after Green Irish Tweed, he made Cool Water. It's almost like a finished version of GIT. And Aventus, of course, was created by Jean-Christophe Hérault, who was Pierre Bourdon's pupil. And there are probably a dozen or maybe even 20 fragrances with pineapple in the top. Things like Smalto's Full Choke or Canali for Men. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. The pineapple note in the top that Pierre Bourdon was playing with right before Aventus came and was just a huge hit, right? After, of course, Pierre Bourdon was retired and his pupil kind of stepped into the Creed vacuum that Pierre Bourdon left, let's say. So his fingerprints are all over the house of Creed. And if you haven't read the Ghost Perfumer book, I would heavily urge you to do so. Okay. So first of all, obviously, it's an excellent read. But if you're a fan of Creed or just kind of like an interesting story in general, I would say you have to check out The Ghost Perfumer. And if you pay attention to the fallout from that book came out years ago. And in fact, it was BlackRock who owned Creed at the time. Olivier Creed had already sold his company for $1 billion to BlackRock, which is just fucking outrageous that Olivier Creed's a billionaire. But and what's interesting is if you look at the fallout, BlackRock did absolutely nothing to combat that. I mean, obviously everything was true. They didn't sue him for slander or libel or whatever the hell they could sue him for. They did nothing except write some hilarious story about how, well, technically the modern Creed story started in the 1960s, although you could trace the old Creed companies back to 1760. But the modern Creed, the story we know, started in 1960. That was the best they could do to try to shield themselves from the fallout. They were probably thinking, like, what the hell did we get ourselves into? And then they went on to sell it for 3 times as much as they bought it for to Kering. But I have a video on Kering acquiring Creed if you want to go deeper into that. But anyway, so that tells you everything you need to know about the legitimacy of the book, The Ghost Perfumer. So anyway, the reason I bring all this up is the connection, the interesting connection, if you will, to Pierre Bourdon, is that in the mid-1990s, so Pierre Bourdon got to fulfill his lifelong dream, which is to do a fragrance for Dior. And I promise you there is a connection to Himalaya, so bear with me, okay? Reason being is that his father worked for Dior his entire life. Actually, he worked with Frederic Mall's grandfather at Dior, and he was a Dior guy through and through, okay? And without going into too much detail on the book, if you haven't read it, read it yourself, but René Bourdon, who was Pierre Bourdon's father, frequently thought his son's creations were shite. Basically, he thought they were bland. He thought they were inferior to the big name perfumers of the day, the great perfumers of the time, and he was not shy to say so. Okay, never said a kind word about his son's creations ever. And in a nutshell, that is one of the main premises of the Ghost Perfumer book, that Pierre Bourdon gave these masterful creations away to Olivier Creed for nothing, just because he couldn't take the rejection of potentially not having somebody accept it if he put it out there, right? So he basically gave these away to Olivier Creed for nothing. Promises of a huge future payout, which never came, by the way, and some tailored Creed suits, which I would love to inspect the quality on those bad boys. I could just imagine. So, but creating a fragrance for Dior basically gave Pierre Bourdon that feeling of finality, of creating something on the level that his father, and I think his father was dead by then, if I'm not mistaken, but his father's approval, if you will, right? So it was a huge deal for him to create a fragrance for Dior. So interestingly, though, even though his old man never said one kind word about Pierre Bourdon's creations, he did wear Koros as his signature scent until the day he died. But that generation was just hard as nails. I mean, you know, that's just how they were. So they're that generation of men that Pierre Bourdon's father came from, some of them were just like that, right? They didn't talk about their feelings, they didn't compliment their sons and stuff like that. But now, how all of this ties into Himalaya is this. The 2 perfumers listed for Dior's Dolce Vita at the time, which was Pierre Bourdon's creation in the mid-90s for women, which was a big hit and still available today, if I understand it right. His name was Maurice Roger. So Maurice Roger and Pierre Bourdon worked hand in hand on this. Well, Maurice Roger, and interestingly enough, if you pull up Dolce Vita, which I've never smelled, but apparently it is supposed to have a little bit of this Serge Lutens Féminité du Bois thing going on, which Pierre Bourdon also had a hand in Féminité du Bois. So both Maurice Roger and Pierre Bourdon are listed as the perfumers, okay? But in reality, Maurice Roger was almost like leading the Dior fragrance division at the time. He was making management decisions, and Pierre came to him with this really great idea after Dolce Vita. And his idea was, hey, I've been working on this gunpowder note. And here's where Himalaya starts to re-enter this tale, okay? So I've been working on this gunpowder note for a masculine perfume that is unique and I think would be a great masculine fragrance for Dior. And rumor has it that Maurice Roger signed off on it. He said, yes, I will agree to it, and we will have the fragrance, but, of course, it's not just like that when something gets signed off on. And in the meantime, Maurice Rogers' health, let's say, began to deteriorate. And the new boss who came in decided they wanted to go in a different direction and said, nope, we're not going to do the gunpowder note Pierre Bourdon creation, okay? So this is the story of how Olivier Creed got his grubby paws on Himalaya for basically nothing. So the new boss of Dior decided to go in a different direction because in Pierre's eyes, it was better for his creations to almost see the light of day, even if he got nothing back in return for it, because he didn't take rejection well, there's a whole story behind that in The Ghost Perfumer. Olivier Creed got something like Himalaya for nothing. And now, granted, the genius of these fragrances may never have seen the light of day if it wasn't for what happened, if it didn't play out the way it did. But, he pulled the old, well, Pierre, no one sees the genius of your work like I do, though. Better to have it see the light of day than sit in your desk, right? And, of course, you know how the game is played over and over. Blah, blah, blah. He got his fragrance. So, let's talk a little about this fragrance. And let's talk a little about the notes. The note listings on the different databases disagree. Parfumo says bergamot, lemon, and mandarin orange in the top, juniper berry, pepper, jasmine, lavender, nutmeg, and gunpowder in the heart, with cedarwood, sandalwood, tonka bean, and vetiver in the base. Fragrantica says something completely different. They say Calabrian bergamot, grapefruit, and Sicilian lemon in the top, sandalwood in the heart, and musk, ambergris, and cedar in the base, which that sounds like the note listing that Creed probably gave to people because they love saying things like Sicilian lemon and Calabrian bergamot and all that stuff, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if there were actually bits and pieces of both that ended up being true, okay? So, again, this is the bottle that made me say, I'll never buy another Creed. And when I say that, you're going to think, oh, I'm going to say this is absolutely terrible. However, basically what Himalaya is, and it's not terrible, by the way, I just don't think it lives up to the original 2010 batch that I have, but really what it is, and the reason I bring up the 2010 batch is I have to reference that mentally because that fragrance, when I wore it, took me to a different spot than this fragrance. They're both Himalaya, but the 2010 batch, and I'll never forget, there's this blend of citruses, spices, and woods, and I got a lot of ambergris in the beginning, and it reminded me of like walking into a Catholic church. Honestly, that's what it reminded me of. It reminded me of like dipping your hand into the holy water and that cool feeling of the holy water like touching your head, okay? And if you look at the silver canteen, which that's what this silver outline was kind of supposed to be, I think the 120 ml bottle actually was metallic. I think it was like a metallic bottle, which the marketing was better back then. This is actually like glass. But the canteen looking bottle, the story that Creed wanted to tell was that, Olivier Creed took this fantastic mountain climbing trip to the Himalayas. And of course, all he carried was his silver canteen and his heart of gold. And anyways, but they thought they would make a great fragrance around it, right? Well, in reality, of course, Pierre Bourdon already made the great fragrance. And now they were building this marketing strategy around it is what I'm guessing happened. And I guess the silver kind of water canteen goes hand in hand with my holy water comparison. But either way, as the fragrance dries down, it starts to get kind of woodier. And I think the star of the show in the dry down is this very smooth Creed DNA sandalwood, which if you smelled many of Creed's fragrances, you will smell that kind of Creed sandalwood. Very fluffy, very soft, very gentle, very calming, very meditative sandalwood, okay? This is a very easy to wear scent. And that's one of the reasons I think Creed is so popular with newcomers, is I could totally see somebody, and when I was a newcomer, this was something that really intrigued me because it was so easy to just grab, spray, walk out the door and smell great. And it's not too challenging and all that good stuff. I wish I had the original 2010 bottle. I wish I still had like a couple mils or something so I could do a comparison video. But now you could argue a decade or probably over a decade ago from the time I wore that to now, this, I I think that things have gotten worse and worse for us fragrance lovers. Like, they just take a little bit at a time. Just slowly over time, things just kind of keep getting worse. It's just how reformulations go. It's like first they start taking a little finger, then they say it's not a big deal, and they take your index finger, and they take your thumb, they take your whole hand, then they take your whole arm, and you're kind of trying to be convinced by them. It's not a big deal. You didn't need that arm. But that's kind of how the reformulations go. So let's talk about the fragrance itself, though, because if you smell this and you have tons of experience with fragrance, you're going to instantly be reminded of one. And I have a vintage bottle of it here. This is XS by Paco Rabanne. Came out in the 1990s, which of course the 1990s were all about freshness and aquatics and all that good stuff. Well, at least the middle to the end of the 90s were. And interestingly enough, I have a tester bottle, thanks to the great Anuj. And if you turn this over on the back, you will see a couple notes there, but one of them is wildflowers. And what's interesting is as you go further into the dry down, Himalaya kind of starts at the top of the mountain and works its way down into the valley. And we'll talk about the transitions here in a little bit. But as we go from the top to kind of the valley, if you will, you'll notice this floral accord in Himalaya peek through. There's no floral notes listed according to the original note listing, although Parfumo shows jasmine. But this wildflower way of describing it is actually a really good descriptor of the way that the florals smell in Himalaya. And it's interesting because Creed went through so many different iterations. Like some of the Creeds that were released felt so original and unique and all this kind of stuff. And then some of them, especially around this time, felt like they were almost turning into a little bit of a clone brand, like a clone brand with the highest quality ingredients. You take something like this and you take XS, you take original vetiver, which smelled like Mugler cologne. You take original Santal, which smelled like Mont Blanc Individual, which was also a Pierre Bourdon. Interestingly enough, more interesting connections. Ironically, the two most unoriginal Creeds have original in front of them, if that tells you anything. But what's interesting is that even though this is a 2002 fragrance, it's a take on a 90s fragrance. So it's almost like it's not an aquatic, but it's like this strange like workaround for an aquatic, Like imagine being in a Russian sauna, seeing your buddy jump into an ice bath after being in the 150-degree sauna, There's this feeling of ice. If you've ever been to a Russian sauna and seen that happen, it is bone chilling. But this feeling of ice, or maybe like drinking water so cold it almost gives you like ice cream throat, ends up coming to the forefront. And of course it's mixed with Creed's ultra creamy and smooth sandalwood, which to be fair was much more beautiful in my unreformulated bottle to my nose. And I definitely got much more of that ambergris and higher quality sandalwood in the original bottle. This one definitely feels a little more flat. It doesn't have as realistic of a sandalwood note, but you get kind of mixed in with that beautiful sandalwood is little hints of fresh greenery here and there. So if you can just imagine like a late April freeze, right? Spring is almost around the corner. Some green grass and shrubs and aromatic greenery, fresh notes are starting to kind of peek through the landscape. Flowers are starting to kind of peek through, and then you get this hard freeze. And as the shrubs and greenery and grass are starting to grow, so on top of it, you can just imagine this layer of like shaved ice, right? But the wildflowers I mentioned earlier are peeking through. So of course it's a Creed. So in the opening, you're going to get a lot of fresh citruses, and they are very well done. Even in the 2017 batch, Creed's calling card is still very well done. The Calabrian bergamot, Sicilian lemon, mandarin orange, and most importantly, this grapefruit, which gives it a bit of this kind of sharp feeling in the opening. It's almost like very sharp in the opening, right before this quick drop off, this quick mountain-like drop off, which it's almost like going from a mountain drop off to like a wheelchair ramp, and then very, very smooth. And so along with everything else, you get this pretty big hit of spice. And I think it's mostly pepper. I think the older bottles had more black pepper, and I think the newer bottles probably have more pink pepper, is my guess. But it's almost like it's more likable. The pink pepper is a very likable, very designer-like note, It has a rosy tint to it. It is a little sharp on occasion, but for the most part, the whole fragrance is very smooth and very refreshing. It's like taking a big sip from like a cold canteen where, you know, you're thirsty after having your heart pumping from climbing. Now, I recently reviewed a fragrance earlier this year called Andy Towers L'Air des Alpes Suisses, okay, which and blatantly the idea with that fragrance was supposed to be the air accord over the Swiss Alps, okay? This fragrance is sort of doing something different, but created when there were the only niche brands were Creed, L'Artisan Parfumeur, Maitre Parfumeur Gantier, Annick Goutal, and maybe one other I can't think of. But I mean, there was no Xerjoff, Tower, Rojas. You know, the list didn't just go on and on and on and on and on of niche fragrances that never end. Yeah, and so I don't want to say this is like an early iteration of Tower's idea, but there's definitely something about the way the freshness smells in Himalaya that will remind you, if you pay attention to like the air over a large mountain range like the Himalayas. And if you don't pay attention, you could just kind of mistake it for like this generic freshness that comes through. But the Himalaya mountains are huge, and I think they stretch over something like 5 countries, if I'm not mistaken. So 5 or 6 countries. So just imagine the air at those heights and all the rivers and streams that flow into the mountain range and this interconnected mountain range. And just imagine, you know, the frozen water when it's cold up top and the streams melting and water running down the mountains. And something I always associated with this fragrance that may kind of help you in how the fragrance dries and how it transitions is just imagine you're a drop of water in the clouds, okay, at the top of the mountain, and you fall out of the clouds, and that water drop falls into a river high up on one of the many peaks of the Himalayas, okay? So, but it's frozen up there. And eventually, when spring comes, it slowly begins to melt and drip. The spring starts to come through, starts to run down the side of the mountain and into the valley, right? And so imagine traveling on that journey. Imagine being that drop of water without being an aquatic, okay? You're just going through the journey of the water. I know it's very hard to imagine this, but so as the fragrance is drying and the hours tick by, slowly you realize you're no longer on the top of a mountain, but now the stream is run down into the valley where the local population lives. Some woodworker goes to the stream, fills up his canteen, and brings you back to his shop, okay? Now, you were in the clouds, so you had that airy sort of high altitude mountain air, but now the stream is run down into the valley, and you were also frozen up there because it had that icy side to it, the coolness, you know, like you can just imagine the cool feeling of like an actual cold canteen, not just a silver painted bottle. And so let's say he brings you back into his workshop. He's a woodworker, okay? And now you're smelling cedar wood, you're smelling sandalwood, and he's kind of smoothing all these woods out, right? So he's buffing everything and making everything smooth and without any kind of sharp edges or lines. And maybe you get a hit of tonka here and there for sweetness. Maybe you get a small hint of vetiver, but more, instead of like the earthiness, more just to give it those little green touches I mentioned earlier. Remember, it's spring, but there was a late sort of freeze, if you will. So imagine the vetiver just giving those little green sprouts of grass just barely peeking through the snow. That's the image of Himalaya. And what's interesting is really it's a woody dry down. Even though in the old bottle, I think I got a lot more ambergris into the dry down. Here, especially in the 2017 bottle I'm discussing, it's really a woody dry down. And the Creed ambergris was much more noticeable in the vintage. And I think the ambergris is one of the things that created that holy, you know, you're entering a church and you have the holy water kind of feel from the vintage bottle. I don't get as much of it from this. I could still see it because of the comparison I already made in my mind, but it was the vintage bottle that really gave me that. So that's kind of the journey of the fragrance, if you will. And if you really want to get a feel for kind of the pompous arrogance of Creed, just imagine Olivier Creed wearing like 100 grand of the most expensive hiking material you could ever imagine, just so he can get a picture with his silver canteen for this fragrance. And that's Himalaya in a nutshell, or in a flask, if you will. The gunpowder note which Pierre Bourdon worked so hard on to basically, create that Dior fragrance that never came, unfortunately, but it could help create the silver flask feeling that he's drinking out of. It could also be used as a silver bullet to kill maybe some unkillable vampire. The gunpowder accord also does a great job, maybe like highlighting this cloudy touch, if you feel, this inevitability that hangs over everything, especially hangs over the mountain peaks. Just imagine like the cooling touch of a bullet or being entered into a chamber, and then you fire it, and now you have the smoke that rises, and that could also help that black pepper, pink pepper sharpness I was talking about earlier. I think that sharp ringing from the shot could also be from this sort of peppery combo that's there, and then all of a sudden everything is jagged and rough, and there's that drop off, and then all of a sudden after that it's all smooth sailing, and everything calms down, and you have peace and serenity, and so quickly it transforms into this just Creed DNA, easily wearable, or Pierre Bourdon's DNA, if you will, Pierre Bourdon's blending. So some say they get this powdery aspect from time to time. I could maybe see it. Maybe I could imagine like shards of sandalwood in the workshop I mentioned filling the air as like the sandalwood heartwood is being shaped. Or maybe a little bit of powdery musk. I know Fragrantica mentioned musk, which Parfumo doesn't, but Fragrantica does. I don't know for me the different aspects. For me, I mean, the different aspects are sandalwood is the star of the show. There's many different woody notes that you will pick up here and there. But if you've smelled the way Creed does sandalwood dry downs, you're going to have an idea of what this smells like. So let's read the blurbs, because those are always fun. So let's read the modern blurb, which is always disappointing. I don't know why these fragrance companies don't put more than 2 minutes worth of time into these. Like, listen to the modern blurb on Himalaya. Now, granted, they're asking $470 for this bottle I'm holding right here, right now. $470. And this is what they come up with. Woody, fresh, spicy, aromatic. A fresh, woody, and adventurous fragrance, Himalaya fuses the power of man and nature to create a scent reminiscent of the beautiful Himalayan mountains. Wow. They really put some brain cells into that one, let me tell you. Here's the original blurb, which I think was much better, or at least maybe closer to the original blurb. This is according to Fragrantica, which thank God they keep these old blurbs because they're gold. Olivier Creed created this masculine fragrance in remembrance of his Tibetan mountain climbing expedition. Himalaya conveys the magnificence, beauty, power, and eternity of the unapproachable mountains with snow-covered peaks. The flacon for Himalaya is unique among the Creed collection for its metallic exterior, which resembles both a mountaineer's canteen as well as the shiny surface of ice on mountain rocks. The fresh, citrusy opening offers notes of grapefruit, bergamot, and lemon. The fragrance takes an oriental turn, that may be pushing it, with a heart featuring sandalwood on a base of musk, ambergris, and cedarwood. Needless to say, the newer bottles are missing something. As I said, this is the fragrance when I finally took the plunge and bought a new Creed, and I was like, never again. Like, that's it. This was the year, 2017, when I bought these new bottles. This was the year where I was like, nope, that's it. I'm done. Like, I have what I have. I'm going to wear what I have, and no more Creeds for me. That's it. And I've stuck by that. I have not bought any new Creeds. I mean, I don't think any new Creeds are probably worth buying, to be honest with you. But yes, this is the bottle that kind of has taken me down that path, and it doesn't deserve that much heat because it's not that bad of a fragrance. It's just compared to what I remembered, the difference is vast, It's mountain ranges apart if you want to use a Himalaya reference. But really, I think somebody who's never smelled the original would probably smell this and like it. Now, would I buy this again after I finish this bottle, which again, I've only got however much is left here, 30, 40 mils, let's say. Would I buy another bottle? No, this is it. I would just wear XS and call it a day. I still have a lot of juice here. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And you can actually see, interestingly enough, Paco Rabanne loved using these kind of silvery outlines. Even the little bit of silver on the original Paco Rabanne pour Homme. No one did anything like this back in the day. So Paco Rabanne loved using these little silver touches, but in XS it was even blatantly kind of put on top. The gun lighter kind of bottle, if you will. So this very well may have inspired, the silveriness may have inspired Himalaya. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. Just an interesting little tidbit. If you have experience with Himalaya, as always, I would love to hear your thoughts. I love doing these reviews for you guys. I have many, many more Creeds we could do. A Creed week is always fun, since we can kind of review it and make fun of them in the same review. But I do really enjoy wearing these, is the thing. You know, that I have a lot of experience with it. I have a lot of memories with them. So even though on one side I'm kind of talking shit about it, on the other side I have to admit that I do enjoy wearing this type of perfumery from time to time, especially since lately I've been enjoying wearing the heavy ouds and the harder, more challenging fragrances. Sometimes wearing something like this is just a little bit refreshing to walk into a place and not be worried about, not that I care, but not be worried about the look the person's giving you because they can smell your oud from 20 miles away. So yeah, I mean, that's what this is made for. This is a perfect office scent. Creeds are perfect for the office anyways, but this is, of many of the Creeds, this is one of the most perfect office scents you could wear. You know, it may become a little bit boring if you wore it too much, but for someone like me that has a rotation, I'm good with it. And then you can just completely reapply. So anyways, that's my take on Himalaya. If you have any experience on Himalaya, do let me know. Love to hear your thoughts as always in the comments. Thanks for watching. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.